General Motors famously designed their world car, the Chevette, in the 1970s, but before this was Chrysler's Hillman Avenger. Well, it was initially called the Hillman Avenger on its UK launch, but it seems like it had more names than I've had hot dinners. Ready for it? The Hillman Avenger was also known as the Chrysler Avenger, Chrysler Sunbeam, Talbot Avenger, Sunbeam Avenger, Dodge Avenger, Plymouth Cricket, Dodge 1800, Dodge Polara, no, not that one, Dodge 1500, Sunbeam 1300, and rather confusingly, the Volkswagen 1500. Why was a car that was so well received with up-to-date styling get overlooked so quickly? And why wasn't such a well put together car developed further over its 20-year life? This is the Hillman Avenger story. William Rootes had founded the Rootes Car Company in 1913, but his death in 1964 and the company's financial problems after the Hillman Imp's lackluster reception meant the new chairman, Rootes' son William Jeffrey Rootes, was open to outside investment. Detroit's Big Three were on the rise after a post-war boom in car production. Ford had been making cars tailored for the European market for years. General Motors had purchased Vauxhall and Opel before the war, which just left Chrysler to use some of that post-war cash to expand into Europe. After failing to buy Leyland Motors, they bought a minority stake in Rootes in 1964, but by 1967 they had a controlling interest. With new American money, it was clear Rootes' range of cars needed updating, and the best place to start was a competitor to Ford's Cortina that by the late 1960s was rapidly climbing the UK sales charts. Their previous competitor, the Hillman Minx, had been replaced by the Hillman Hunter, but Rootes saw a market for something in between their smaller Imp and the Hunter to directly compete with the Cortina. Although work had begun in 1963, Chrysler's investment in the Coventry Design Centre would allow work to start on the new car in 1965, and Rootes would explore all technical avenues for the new car. They settled on a 4-cylinder engine, but should it be an inline, V or a flat configuration? What metal should it use? Tried and tested cast iron or lightweight aluminium? All configurations were tested. With car makers rolling out hydropneumatic suspension, the Rootes team again investigated all the options, but their investigations led them back to the tried and tested solution of an inline 4-cylinder engine, rear-wheel drive with conventional suspension. It not only worked well, but came at the right price for a high-volume car with tight profit margins. It also helped Chrysler's plan to sell it around the world. A conventional engine and suspension would be easier to manufacture on existing equipment in developing nations. Considerable time and effort was done tuning its handling with features such as a front anti-roll bar to try to make this the best handling car in its class. The conventional engine would be all new and would be offered as both a 1.25 litre and a 1.5 litre. The gearbox would again be standard, just 4 forward gears with synchromesh, which was becoming a necessity by the late 1960s. All this was bolted to a chassis with a 2.5 metre wheelbase, exactly the same length as its competitor, the Ford Cortina. The wheelbase was the same as the larger Hillman Hunter, but the shorter overhangs of this new Cortina killer would make it a much smaller car. And despite there being less metal in the front and behind the driver, improved crumple zones would give better crash protection. What wouldn't be standard was the shape. A daily dose of American TV shows introduced the British buying public to the latest car styles. With new American owners and a steady stream of Detroit engineers filing through the design centre in Coventry, this new car would take some cool from the good old US of A, scaled down for British roads of course. This new car would be a breath of fresh air that would steal the thunder from its stodgy British competitors. The new car would have a fastback style with trademark J tail lights. By the end of 1966, management signed off on the final shape. Where the new car was influenced by the cars seen on American TV shows like Mission Impossible and The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the name of the car may have been influenced by a homegrown TV spy show that was required viewing in the 1960s. The new car would be the Avenger, an exciting name for this rebirth of Roots for the 1970s, although quite what it was going to avenge and why was never quite clear. Many of Roots' cars were badge engineered as Hillmans, Singers and Sunbeams, but in the UK at least, the Avenger would only be known as a Hillman. Abroad, it would be a completely different matter. Many different interior layouts were investigated. The initial plan was to offer 3 different dashboards for each different trim level, but in the spirit of rationalisation for this cost-effective car, this was pared down to just 1. New ergonomic thinking influenced the dashboard, placing major controls within the eyeline and within reach. A rare thing for the 1960s, the likely, mostly male interior team spent time to ask women what they wanted from the interior. Given that it was the 1960s, this was limited to groovy colour and fashion choices, but hey, it was a start and it would go on to influence Chrysler's European vehicles for the 1970s. Seats on the higher spec model would get brushed nylon, something that sounds cheap and tacky now, but when your only choice is plastic or leather, this was a soft, space-age new material that made the car a cut above the rest. Most of 1967 was spent refining the shape, and by the end of the year it was ready to be turned into a production vehicle. Chrysler went on another spending spree, buying Spanish Barreiros in 1969 and French Simca the following year. Roots was renamed Chrysler UK, and there was hope the new Avenger would be sold in this new set of pan-European dealerships. With these 3 companies spread across Europe, Chrysler was poised to bring the fight to Ford and General Motors, a fight that was to start with the new Avenger. The new Hillman Avenger burst on the scene just 2 months into the 1970s with its striking contemporary design that made it look like a more practical version of Ford's new Capri. The motoring press generally praised the car with 4 doors, solid suspension and acceptable performance from its standard transmission setup. The public was keen as well, with 50,000 produced after only 6 months. But the London Motor Show in October 1970 caused Avenger sales to hit a bump in the road, despite the introduction of the quicker twin-carb Avenger GT. Customers were introduced to the new larger Vauxhall Viva with similar American styling, but Ford would launch their equally American Mark III Cortina. While the length remained the same, the wheelbase increased, meaning interior space was now suddenly better than the cramped Avenger. Where the Avenger had 1.25 litre and 1.5 litre engines, the Cortina had larger 1.3 and 1.6 litre engines with a top-of-the-range 2 litre model. The Avenger would fall between the Escort and Cortina, while still being priced to compete with the Cortina. With British Leyland launching the Morris Marina in 1971, what seemed like an open market at the start of 1970 had turned into a crowded market with tight profit margins just 12 months later. In business speak, the blue ocean had quickly turned into a red ocean. The Cortina would compete with the Avenger on the continent as the Taunus, and Ford were moving faster to successfully integrate their European operations. Again, Chrysler were behind the ball, but they had a good, solid car, and they had plans to sell it not just in Europe, but around the world.
It's a fact. Chrysler Plymouth offers more kinds of new cars than anyone else, including Duster, Satellite, Roadrunner, Fury, Chrysler, and now a new entry in the subcompact field, the little car that can.
Here comes Cricket, coming through.
With the Avenger being a minnow amongst North American cars, it would be known as the friendly-sounding Plymouth Cricket, maybe playing on the popularity of the other European insect, the VW Beetle. Chrysler played up its larger luggage space and 4 doors compared to the Beetle's 2. The Cricket was also going up against new competition from Ford and GM, who'd created their own Beetle competitors. The Cricket, though, had a bevy of features, with an automatic choker standard and the option of an automatic gearbox and air conditioning. Both Britain and North America got a practical estate or wagon version in 1972. Heavy-duty springs allowed for a heavier carrying load, but this was really meant for taking the kids and all their paraphernalia to the seaside, not really for commercial use. Promotional copy encouraged customers to sleep in it, accommodating people up to 2 meters tall. But American customers didn't warm to the 4 or the 5-door models. It was being outsold by another Chrysler import, the Dodge Colt, manufactured in Japan by Mitsubishi. Chrysler would end sales of the fuel-economical Plymouth Cricket in 1973, just before the fuel crisis would drive customers towards buying cars that sipped less gas. With Chrysler solidifying its European operations, the Hillman Avenger will be sold on the continent, as other Roots vehicles had also been done in the past. Here it was known as the Sunbeam 1250 and 1500, and local marketing folk were happy to play up the exotic British connection, although I'm not sure if every car came with a free subscription to the Times newspaper. Far away in New Zealand, the new Hillman Avenger will be built from knockdown kits, initially only the standard 1.5 litre model, but the twin-carb TC would soon arrive. Kiwis would have to wait until 1975 to get the estate version. Chrysler pitched this inexpensive family car for many countries that had fledgling car industries. Over in Argentina, the Avenger was manufactured in Chrysler's factory in Buenos Aires as the Dodge 1500, rather logically with the 1.5 litre engine, but confusingly also as the 1500M with a 1.8 litre engine. In 1973, it would be produced both in Colombia and Brazil. It would also be sold as a 2-door model, a new version that was also introduced back home. Again, it would be known as a Dodge, initially the Dodge 1500, but eventually it would become the Dodge Polara, which was confusingly a completely different car in neighbouring Argentina. The Brazilian version of the Avenger made a few changes to the body as well, including swapping out the J-shaped taillights for something more conventional. Back in Britain, Chrysler had produced a warmed-up GT model, but in 1972 produced its answer to the sporty models Ford was selling, the limited edition Avenger Tiger with an uprated 92 horsepower engine. With the stock Avenger already having good handling, the additional power proved to be a good combination, so the 107 horsepower Tiger II appeared later that same year, still using the 1.5 litre engine, but finally getting to 60 in less than 10 seconds. Only a few hundred were sold, but they helped to draw customers into dealerships to sell regular Avengers. With the public watching the British Touring Car Championships week in, week out, the Avenger entered and won many races during the mid-1970s using 205 horsepower 2-litre engines. The Cortina's engines were always just a little bit bigger than the Avengers, so in 1973 both engines got a bump to 1.3 and 1.6 litres, giving both cars more power. Standard equipment was improved to help the car compete, and it got a better optional automatic gearbox. More worldwide Avenger production came online, this time in South Africa. It would be known as the Dodge Avenger, but to satisfy local content rules, Chrysler would use the 1.6 litre engine from the locally produced Peugeot 404. The Avenger was also imported into Iran, and by 1978 it was being manufactured there. But back home, it was becoming increasingly clear that as Avenger sales had stalled, Chrysler had stopped developing it. The Cortina got an update, putting it further ahead in both space, styling and performance. Understandably, Avenger sales were down, and it was now getting outsold by foreign importers Datsun and Fiat. Chrysler UK's American owners had become disillusioned with its British subsidiary and its endless strikes and union games. Detroit started investing in its French operation, and Chrysler UK would take a back seat. The Avenger's rear-wheel drive chassis was old hat. Front-wheel drive was the future. Chrysler threatened to end all UK production, and with it the Hillman Avenger, but the government stepped in with a bailout at the end of 1975. This allowed Chrysler to fund a small front end, dashboard and interior update for the Avenger, but the government funding stipulated something much more adventurous. Chrysler had always intended to produce both a coupe and a hatchback version of the Avenger, but lack of funds from slow sales had scuppered that idea. but the government funding had required Chrysler to produce a new British-built Super Mini, so the old Avenger hatchback designs were dusted off to cash in on this new three-door trend. This would also fill the hole left when they ended Hillman in production. The chassis was shortened by around 8 centimeters, the tiny Hillman Imp engines were fitted into the Hampel engine bay, and a new modern exterior design crafted, something the Avenger sorely needed. But underneath it was pure Avenger, rear-wheel drive and all, making it an oddity compared to its front-wheel drive European hatchback competition. With British jobs on the line, the car came together in a remarkably short space of time, just 19 months from a drawing to a finished car. The new car would get a classic roots name, the Chrysler Sunbeam. Although given until recently Avengers on the continent had been sold as Sunbeams, they could have been sold there as a Sunbeam. The motoring press went kind on the car, given it was a 7-year-old chassis with an Avenger interior all thrown together in record time, but British jobs were on the line for its success. This was in stark contrast to the vitriolic press the Rover 75 would receive 20 years later. The 1970s were a different time. But then again, maybe 90s reviewers were doing their job of informing the public and not pulling their punches. The consensus from reviewers was that the Sunbeam was roomy, practical, with average handling, but not a great deal compared to the competition. The car sold reasonably well, helping to keep those British workers in jobs as the government had hoped, and the GTI wannabe 100 horsepower TI model would keep customers interested. But as it was little more than an updated 1972 Avenger Tiger, it didn't really impress the motoring journalists. Chrysler, ever keen to give old rivals Ford a black eye with their dominant Escort RS, put their faith in Colin Chapman and Lotus. They produced race-winning Fords in the 1960s. What would happen when they fitted essentially a Lotus Esprit engine in a Sunbeam? The result was the Sunbeam Lotus. The standard suspension and chassis obviously wouldn't do, so it was stiffened with a larger anti-roll bar. In road trim, it got 150 horsepower, and in rallying trim, 250, going on to win the 1980 Lombard RAC Rally. With its understated paint trim, this was the ultimate sleeper car, a supermarket runabout with a secret to tell. It was a bright spot for Chrysler UK, but also a swan song. The Sunbeam would be the last car the UK operation, originally the Roots Motor Company, would produce. Only 2,300 of the projected 4,500 production run was ever sold, thanks to a new fuel crisis. The UK government had effectively ordered the Sunbeam to be produced, and this created an odd situation for Chrysler. They were already working on a new Super Mini world car of their own, the Horizon, that they planned to launch in 1978. With a wheelbase about the size of the Avenger, it was a little bit larger than the Sunbeam, and the two made a rather confusing combination. Underneath, the Horizon was all new, with modern front-wheel drive and engines courtesy of Chrysler France. This was the direction Chrysler was headed, world cars produced in collaboration with its French operation. The 1976 Avenger update had been done on the cheap, and customers had noticed. With an anemic marketing budget, they might not even have noticed Chrysler had updated the car, so it's perhaps not surprising that sales didn't improve. Chrysler were milking the sunk cost of the Avenger production line for all they could to try to keep its European operation profitable. It was fighting a losing cause, and by 1979, Chrysler's European operation had been sold to PSA, makers of Peugeots and Citroëns. The Chrysler name was replaced by the Talbot name, dug up from Roots history. The Linwood factory continued to churn out Sunbeams and Avengers, but the writing was on the wall for the car left to wither on the vine. Despite government protestations and offers of handouts, PSA scheduled the factory for closure, and the last Avenger and Sunbeam rolled off the production line in 1981, and customers were directed to the Talbot Horizon, Solara and the new Samba instead. Around 200,000 Sunbeams and 640,000 Avengers had been produced in both Coventry and Linwood. But that wasn't quite the end for the Avenger. It was still being produced in Argentina, where Chrysler had a long relationship with Volkswagen, producing the Beetle for many years. Volkswagen eventually purchased the Argentinian operation outright in 1980. So that meant the Avenger, a car that had received so many different names, was given one last rebranding. Perhaps the most surprising of all as the Volkswagen 1500. Argentinians would continue to buy Rootes' family car until 1990, 20 years after it had first launched. The Avenger turned heads on its debut, but its old Detroit rival quickly outflanked it. This means the Avenger story has been overshadowed by the dominant Escort and Cortina, but this is a shame as it was a well put together vehicle that with some better marketing and investment could have become a dominant player in the European car market. Thanks to its simple but rugged construction, the Rootes engineer's work has been driven by many happy customers all over the planet. Chrysler skimped on underbody rust protection, and the long trips the bodies took from Coventry to Scotland didn't help. In 2021, only 58 Avengers were left on British roads, but the hatchback Sunbeam has fared at least a little better, with 168 still left to be admired. Apparently, the most popular colour is blue.